Chris White stream. He offered a he did a very good stream. It was a night owl stream, so hope you guys are doing well. Hope all is well. I'm gonna hold on just 1 second. I'm gonna send this link to the Telegram, his Telegram group as well. So just hang on 1 second. Just hang on 1 second. Just gonna get that tended to right away. So okay, hey, what's going on, guys? I'm going to talk to you today about a glacier that collapsed in the Himalayan mountains in India, and that was on the Himalayan mountains represent a border where India is, and where the Himalayan mountains are. A glacier had fell off the Himalayan mountains and collapsed, and 26 people are already reported dead, which is a sad situation. And another 171 are missing, and they're presumed to be dead. Most of these 171 people that are missing are workers in nearby two hydroelectric dams, and they rescue workers are looking for them, but they're presumed to be dead. It's just a sad situation, and it was just basically like an avalanche. The glacier just collapsed and fell, and just killed at least 26 people that we know of, but we assume and presume that it's going to be several more. Also, just so please keep India in your thoughts and your prayers. Also, now in Namibia, the COVID-19 crisis has hit Namibia extremely badly right now. Recently, they tested about 24,000 people, and over 6,000 of them, a little bit over 6,000 of them, showed up positive. Were tested positive. Well, Hage Geingob, the president of Namibia, will be the first to get the COVID-19 vaccine when those vaccines arrive in mid-March. And he says he's doing this to lead by example and to show there is no reason to distrust the vaccine, and there's no reason to not take the vaccine. But I firmly believe that this is just, he's just doing this because he wants to stay in power. He loves his power, and he wants to hang on to it, and he believes he's entitled to get the first vaccine. Because if he really believed in this situation, then he would get his health minister to be the first person to get the vaccine, because the health minister knows more about the vaccines than he does, and the health minister knows who the vaccines need to be distributed to. So if he wanted to lead by example, he needed to have his health minister get the first vaccine, not President Geingob himself. And I firmly believe that is just a bad choice of leadership, and a bad choice of just a bad situation in Namibia. Also, the United States has strongly discouraged travel to and from Namibia. They've banned travel to and from South Africa, but the United States has already raised Namibia to level 4. They are raising it to level 4 because of the South African COVID strain, and because Namibia is right on the border with South Africa. And the United States is, like I said, they're strongly discouraging their people from visiting Namibia right now, but it's not like South Africa. The travel has not been banned, but I firmly support this situation, because the COVID-19 situation in Namibia is just getting out of control. And also, Namibia has suspended a lot of non-emergency medical services because of the COVID-19 crisis, because right now several Namibian healthcare workers have been diagnosed with COVID-19, because Namibia has been severely understaffed with healthcare workers, same as Malawi, and they have just had a hard time fighting and combating the COVID-19. So I am okay with this if a travel ban to and from Namibia gets implemented. I've always wanted to go to Namibia, but just not right now, not at the moment, just because with the COVID-19 crisis. Now you go to South Africa. The South Africa has suspended their agreement that they had with Oxford AstraZeneca, because the AstraZeneca vaccine has been deemed either ineffective against the South African strain, or it'll only give you about 25 to 35% immunity from the South African strain. And this is according to the BBC. And the new South African strain has accounted for 90% of South Africa's COVID-19 cases. The new South Africa strains accounted for 90% of South Africa's new COVID-19 cases. So South Africa is looking at trying to work out an agreement with Johnson & Johnson or with Pfizer. Well, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine's about, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will be about 50 to 60% immunity. Newer studies show that the Pfizer vaccine may be as high as 70%, give you 70% immunity against the South African strain of the COVID-19, but more studies have to be made for that. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, though, doesn't have to be refrigerated. The Pfizer vaccine does, and most of South Africa's public health care facilities do not have the refrigeration necessary to be able to store the Pfizer vaccine. So at the moment, South Africa needs to go with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, because the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will give the patients a little more than 50% immunity from the South African strain, number one. And that's about what the flu shot gives you from the flu vaccine. And number two, the public health care facilities just don't have the proper refrigerated units to be able to store the Pfizer vaccine. So that is that's what's going on in South Africa right now. Now, we're going to talk about something not related to COVID, the crime rate in South Africa. More and more gun in South Africa due to all the permit laws. Some of them are buying it illegally, and some of them are taking firearms courses to learn how to use a gun, because the femicide in South Africa is right now. And Vice News, which is an American news network owned by HBO channel, they had recently reported this, that a woman in South Africa is murdered every 3 hours, and it's largely due to gender-based violence. Well, in South Africa, it's very, very difficult to get a gun, and the high gun control, the strict gun control in South Africa has not curbed the crime in South Africa. South Africa's violent crime rate is 7 times higher than that of the United States. At least 7 times higher than that. And the murder rate is probably 10 to 12 times higher than that of the United States. And so you can't blame these women for wanting to go buy guns to protect themselves. And the gun control has not worked for South Africa. So the South African government needs to back off and allow these women to buy guns to protect themselves against rapists and murderers and against burglars. That stuff just needs to go on right now. And South Africa is not the only place where gun control has not worked. You look at Washington, D.C., when they started having laws making strict gun control measures, the violent crime rate and the murder rate in Washington, D.C. went through the roof. Also, in the country of Jamaica, as I pointed out, Jamaica has a murder rate 10 times higher than that of the United States, but gun control has been a way of life in Jamaica since the 1970s. It is very, very difficult for somebody to get a gun in Jamaica. Nevertheless, gun violence in Jamaica is very high, and violence in is very high. They have the third highest murder per capita rate in the world. The first is South Africa. I think the second might be Venezuela, but the third, or Honduras, but the third is Jamaica. Jamaica has the third highest murder per capita rate in the world, and it is one of the most difficult places to get a gun. So gun control has not worked. So if people say that gun control reduces crime, the statistics show that it doesn't. Gun control does not reduce crime, as many South Africans know. Many South Africans know that gun control does not reduce crime. If you look at Switzerland, almost everybody owns a firearm. Now, in Switzerland, mandatory military service is mandatory for almost all able-bodied males in Switzerland. Okay, and in Switzerland, if you receive the proper training for your weapon in the military, which most all of them do, you can take that weapon home with you, particularly if you're still doing reserve military service. Well, Switzerland has one of the lowest violent crime rates in the world. Switzerland's murder rate is almost at 0. Now, not just anybody can own a gun. If you do mandatory military service and don't have a criminal record, you can keep your gun. Also, if you go buy a gun in a store, they do an extensive background check on you, and the background check takes a while. But if you pass the background check, then you can buy and own the gun. And in Switzerland, like I said, the violent crime rate is near zero. Switzerland has one of the lowest, if not the lowest, violent crime rate in the world. So the argument that I make why gun control is not effective is you look at the situation in Switzerland. Switzerland and violent crime is almost non-existent in Switzerland. So people need to look at that before they say gun control is the way to go. And a lot of, I mean, some South African criminals have guns, they get them illegally, some don't, but a lot of them have probably used knives and they've used pangas. They've just used anything they can get their hand on. And South Africa averages about 57 murders a day. The figure now may be up to 60 because the murder rate has gone up in South Africa. And almost every single South African I've met had a friend or two that had been murdered. And in America, that is unheard of. Most people I know have not had a friend or a family member that has been murdered. Now, some have. I had an uncle that died a year before I was born because he had been murdered. He was involved in an illegal gambling ring but won some money. But one guy found out he won some money. They followed him to the park and knocked him in the head with a pipe and killed him. But at the same time, not most family members I know have not had a family member that's been murdered. And but in South Africa, it's just a different story. It seems like most of my viewers and most of my subscribers that are South African have been a victim of crime at least one time in their life. And it is just, crime just seems to be like a way of life in South Africa, unfortunately. But with the stupid ANC started implementing strict gun control measures where people could not get guns to defend themselves. And also, if you have a burglar or an intruder in your house in South Africa, you have to fire a warning shot before you shoot at the criminal. And then if you don't do that, you can go to jail if you don't fire a warning shot at the criminal, which is asinine and it is ludicrous to have that law in place. I mean, nobody should be breaking into your house, and while they may not be intending to kill you, they just may be intending to steal stuff. You don't know that, and it's your job to protect yourself and protect your family. I mean, you can't to do or intending not to do. That's just sick. It's stupid, and it's asinine that would happen. I mean, that's just crazy that something like that would go on. So, hope South Africa gets their vaccine soon, but they've suspended, as I've said, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. I'm going to be getting my vaccine, my second dosage Wednesday. That's my second dosage. But I didn't have hardly any side effects from my first injection, but my second injection, it's typical after the injection, you run like a 99.4 Fahrenheit or 100-degree Fahrenheit fever for a day or two, and you also have the sweats and chills for a few days, but then you're supposed to feel better. But they've done newer studies on this Pfizer vaccine that show that 80%, you're probably 90% protected now. They still have to do more studies on it, but you're 90% protected against the COVID-19 after your first injection. So hopefully, I mean, we may just get to the point where there's just one injection instead of 2 injections for the COVID-19 vaccine. With that being said, and right now, I believe that the South African government needs to pay Johnson and Johnson half the price what Johnson and Johnson offered for the vaccines, and they need to purchase them immediately. They also need to admit their mistakes, and they also need to admit that they embezzled the $17.5 million for COVID-19 grants that banks in the UK and also banks in Africa gave them because their public hospitals were not fit to treat the COVID-19 crisis. They need to admit their mistakes. They need to buy the Johnson & Johnson vaccines at 1/2 price. And then they need to pay the money back. And then they need the money that they used to pay back. They need to put the refrigerated units in the in the public hospitals where they can get the Pfizer vaccine. That's what they need to do. But you know, the ANC always blames apartheid, and they always blame Jan van Riebeck, a 1652 Dutch settler, for everything. The ANC doesn't admit that they're wrong. They don't admit that they make mistakes. And it's the same thing with the EFF. Julius Malema had went and met with Jacob Zuma at the expense of tax dollars paid by South Africans, and it looked like they were buddies. And y'all know that before Julius Malema was the leader of the EFF, he was president of the ANC Youth League, and the ANC kicked him out for embezzling money and living luxuriously by embezzling the money. Now, a lot of the ANC leaders were doing that. Julius Malema was just the scapegoat. Well, Julius Malema had said he would kill for Jacob Zuma, and said that when he was leaving, that Jacob Zuma was still a good president, and that Jacob Zuma was still somebody that needed to be respected, even though he got kicked out of the ANC. But then less than a year later, he started the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, and then said Zuma must fall. Now he's taking a completely 180 turn and meeting with Jacob Zuma and having tea with Jacob Zuma, and it looks like it's all hunky-dory. Julius Malema is a political opportunist, plain and simple. And Julius Malema brainwashes his followers. He goes for the poorest of the poor and the illiterate of society, and he believes that they're not educated and can't think for themselves, so he just tells them what he thinks they want him to say so he can get approval. But the EFF didn't hardly gain any ground this last election. The EFF, it doesn't look like the EFF is going to get 15% of the vote. The only reason I believe Julius Malema met with Jacob Zuma is because there's a Zuma faction in the ANC that's disgruntled with Ramaphosa and the ANC, and I believe that Julius is trying to get the Zuma faction of the ANC to come vote for the EFF, because the EFF is becoming more of an ineffective and inefficient political party day by day. And I believe that's why he met with Jacob Zuma when he did. And that was just a sick and sadistic situation when he did meet with Jacob Zuma. That just shows you that Julius Malema, he doesn't have any convictions. He doesn't have any beliefs. He doesn't have any principles. Julius Malema is in it for one person, that's Julius Malema, and he cares about one thing, and that's power. Julius Malema only cares about one thing, and that's straight up power. And I talked about in the last stream, but if some of you guys weren't there, the president of Liberia, George Weah, his son, George Weah Jr., is in Paris, France, and he was having too loud of a party, and he was having tons of people over, which was not a good situation for the COVID. Well, when the police, and he was making a lot of noise, so a lot of his neighbors called the police to try to tell him to tone it down. Well, when the police get there, they tell George Weah Jr. to tone the noise down, to calm down, and to get some people out. It's not good for the COVID-19. It gets borderline hostile. And they're really arrested and reviewing his diplomatic passports to see if he qualifies under diplomatic immunity or not. And like father, like son, George Weah Sr. has not done a good job running Liberia, and apparently his son gets a lot of his ideas from his father. And George Weah has ran Liberia's economy into the ground for the most part. The poor have only gotten poorer. There's been no major foreign investment in Liberia, and the conditions of the poor have not improved, and he promised they would if he got elected. And he refuses to take a lot of the blame for anything that has transpired in Liberia. So that is what's going on. That's what's going on. And then his son's not even in Liberia. He's in Paris living a luxurious life, and then he is not even courteous enough to have just a few people in his house, in his apartment, and to not keep the noise down, and he gets arrested for being belligerent when the officers asked him nicely to turn down the volume, which is basically a sick and sadistic situation. So yeah, that is what's going on. And also, when Liberia was founded in the 1800s by the basically by the American Colonization Society, or the ACS, when their goal was to relocate African Americans to Africa. Some were slaves, some were free blacks, but a lot of them did not feel that African Americans assimilate into the U.S. way of life. That was contradictory to what the American Anti-Slavery Society said. They wanted the blacks freed and us from slavery and assimilated into the United States because America was their home. Many of them have never even seen Africa by this time. They had no idea what African culture was like or anything like that. Well, the American Colonization Society, though, did basically establish the land in Liberia. They purchased some land, and the American Colonization Society. But when people get there, as many as 1/3 of the newly freed slaves and the free blacks died of tropical diseases that they had zero immunity to. They had zero immunity to these diseases. Most of them did not even know what malaria was, but they were dying of malaria. Many of them, and there was a lot of land in Liberia. Some of it was suitable for farming, but some of it wasn't. So it took a large process to clear a lot of the land and try to make the land suitable for farming. And then they also had to deal with angry, hostile tribes like the Vi tribe, or there was this tribe known as the Fishermen. That's how they made a lot of their livings, but they were hostile to a lot of the newly freed slaves. And the slaves were known as the Americo-Liberians. And the Americo-Liberians did set up the plantations, and they set up farming, and they set up commercial centers in Monrovia, and they named the capital Monrovia after U.S. President James Monroe, because James Monroe was a supporter of the American Colonization Society. But then a lot of the tribes along the coast traded slaves. They captured sometimes members of their own tribe or sometimes members of a rival tribe, and sold them into slavery to Spanish and Portuguese traders. And while the slave trade was illegal by that time, the United States outlawed the slave trade in 1808, and England outlawed slavery shortly after that time, and they declared the slave trade illegal for the whole world. And England would get a lot of these ships and then free the slaves and then repatriate them back to their homeland in Africa. Well, the newly freed slaves agreed with England on this, and the Americo-Liberians, and they were determined to put an end to the slave trade. And they declared war on a lot of these tribes because a lot of these tribes were still trading slaves. And the tribe said, "This is our business. Stay out of our business. This doesn't concern you guys." But when Americo-Liberians tried to meet with a lot of these tribes, and this was really true with the Vi tribe and the Mandingo tribes, they were met with hostility. And they were met with not a very welcoming reception. Let's just put it that way. And then there was just an all-out warfare between the Americo-Liberians and the what people would call the native Liberians. And at the end of the day, the Americo-Liberians basically won the war. But at the same time, the U.S. government saw the oppression as just outright brutal, because many Americo-Liberians enslaved these rival tribes and forced them to work in the plantations as slaves, and then imposed an alien ideology on a lot of these tribes, which is why Liberia basically declared its independence on July 26, 1847. Liberia was declared independent from the United States on July 26, 1847. And for the longest time, the United States did not recognize the country of Liberia. It took the U.S. about, I want to say maybe 15, 20 years to recognize the country of Liberia. They weren't the first country to do so, but that was at the behest of African-American leader Booker T. Washington. He didn't agree with what a lot of the Americo-Liberians were doing, but at the same time, he told President Theodore Roosevelt, if we don't recognize Liberia and form an alliance with them, England might or France might, and it'll be an outright war between Western imperial powers. We need to put our foot down and show Liberia that we're their strongest ally. So it was a black person in Booker T. Washington that encouraged the United States to recognize Liberia and form a strong alliance with them. It wasn't a Caucasian American that did that. But so yeah, still doing more research on the subject, and hope you guys are doing well. And probably I'm gonna go about 5 more minutes, then wrap it up. Thanks for the 2 likes right here, much appreciated. And with the Liberian Civil War that took place, like I said, but even before the Civil War, all presidents of Liberia were Americo-Liberians, even though they made up only 5% of Liberia's population, until a sergeant in the Liberian army named Samuel Doe, and in 1986 he overthrew William Tolbert. William Tolbert was the president of Liberia, and yes, he was an Americo-Liberian as well. And William Tolbert was overthrown, and Samuel Doe was the first native Liberian that had ever been president of Liberia since Liberia was established. But then when that happened, many Americo-Liberians fled. A lot of them fled back to the United States. The percentage of Americo-Liberians that live in Liberia now are very, very small. Even the ones that had ancestry from the United States is very, very small. When Samuel Doe took power, many fled. But then Charles Taylor overthrew Samuel Doe, but the RUF declared war against Charles Taylor, Revolutionary United Front, and there was a civil war, and where 250,000 Liberians had died in the Civil War. 250,000 Liberians had died in a struggle between Charles Taylor's forces and the RUF, and both groups engaged in horrible war crimes. And both of them engaged in horrible war crimes. And one reason this is one thing I want to touch on. One reason Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who was president of Liberia, chose to pardon a lot of the war criminals in Liberia, and one reason she chose to just let them go and reintegrate them into society, I'm not saying I agree with this, but she said a lot of them were child soldiers who really didn't know what they were doing, and a lot of them were given drugs by their adult commanders, and so a lot of them were high as a kite when they were doing a lot of their war crimes. So that's why she faced a lot of criticism for it, but she also had some support. She said that most of them were child soldiers that didn't know what they were doing, so she said she thought it was only right to pardon them and try to reintegrate a lot of these war criminals into society and try to build Liberia's economy. Also, before Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, a Liberian president was typically only permitted to serve one term, but what they could do is if they served one term, they could go years later and run for re-election. That happened with Liberia's first president, Joseph Jenkins Roberts, and some other presidents in the past too. But Ellen Johnson Sirleaf changed the Constitution where a Liberian president could serve 2 terms, but she said, my first term I had to lay out the plans to develop the economy, and I couldn't get it all done in my first term, so I had to basically go a second term. So now a Liberian president can serve 2 terms, but after the second term, she stepped down. She stepped down after the second term. When, as popular as she was, she could have kept ruling for a 3rd term and beyond, but she chose to step down after the second term because she said, I wasn't trying to get power, I was just trying to develop my country's economy, but I just couldn't do it in a span of 1 term, particularly after Liberia had been so devastated by the Civil War. And it worked. I mean, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but it worked. But unfortunately, George Weah is undoing a lot of stuff that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf had in place. Now, George Weah was an excellent soccer player. When he was playing soccer for Liberia's national team, he was FIBA Player of the Year. But in addition to saying he was a champion of the poor people and a native Liberian, and not an Americo-Liberian, he also got elected because he was a star athlete. And Liberia is not the first country to have that happen. Liberia is definitely not the first country to have that happen. There have been American athletes that have gotten elected to political positions, and I don't want to talk about it, and when I was in the Dominican Republic, this baseball player who played in the major leagues named Raul Mondesi, and he got elected to Congress. So Liberia is not the first country to have that happen. former soccer player, and he basically helped put Liberian soccer. And many people thought it would have been cool to have a Liberian athlete as a president, but the best athletes don't always make the best presidents, as Liberia is currently finding out at the moment. So, yeah, as Liberia is currently finding out at the moment, the best athletes do not always make the best presidents. So, yeah, found that out. So, all right. Well, I'm gonna look. It's past midnight in South Africa, but you guys are still tuned in, so I guess I'll keep going for a little while longer. So I don't know if you guys saw that one live stream that I did with Mississippi and Liberia, but there is this plantation called Prospect Hill Plantation in Jefferson County, Mississippi. It's about 40 miles south of where I grew up in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And the owner of the plantation, Isaac Ross, in his will left money to all his slaves and into the American Colonization Society, and said, free my slaves and take them back to Africa, because under Mississippi law you couldn't free your slaves. Had he not done that, they would have been sold off to the highest bidder. And Isaac Ross did not support the breakup of slave families. He also secretly taught his slaves how to read and write. So they get relocated from there to Liberia. But before that could happen, the children of Isaac Ross and his grandchildren contested the will, and the slaves got angry about it. The slaves tried to burn down the house where the kids and grandkids were in, and they also tried to poison the kids and grandkids. But it was a failed plot. And so there was a lynch mob that came, and they lynched 11 of the slaves. But then the slaves appealed it to the Mississippi Supreme Court. And in 1845, the Mississippi Supreme Court ruled in favor of the slaves. And so the slaves went to Africa, and at the time there was a settlement in Liberia that was called the Mississippi Colony. It's now called the Simcoe County, but many people still call it Mississippi to this day. There were also slaves in Natchez as well as Greenville, Mississippi, that were freed and taken back to Liberia. Natchez, Mississippi was about an hour and a half south of where I grew up. Greenville, Mississippi was about 2 hours north of where I grew up. But Greenville, Mississippi was named after James Green, who was a judge in Mississippi. And James Green freed his slaves at his death and encouraged his slaves to go back to Liberia, or go back to Africa, through the American Colonization Society, but specifically Liberia. And they were in the Mississippi colony as well. And there's a city in Liberia called Greenville, Liberia, same as Greenville, Mississippi, named after James Green. And many of Liberia's ships are docked in Greenville, Liberia. Also, Liberia gets a lot of their shipping products from South Korea. This I did not know, but they buy a lot of their shipping propellers for their ships. They buy them mostly from South Korea. So South Korea is a major trading partner to Liberia. That is something I did not know, but I found that out yesterday, that China is Liberia's main trading partner. The United States is up there. But as far as the ships go, South Korea, Liberia imports a lot of South Korea's products to help build their ships. And South Korea has a major shipbuilding industry with Hyundai. Hyundai just doesn't make cars. They also make ships as well. So anyways, I'm going to end this right here. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for the 2 likes. Hope everybody's doing well. Take care. God bless. And bye-bye. Bye-bye.